more people go to church among Christians and other religious services, there has been a sort of market orientation. So not having an established church, people in a way shop for churches, and they find what suits them. And I think an irony of the modern world is that the established state churches that were founded centuries ago are in the countries which now have the lowest church attendance and the least engagement of the population. In many ways, they turned out initially to organize things and then, in a certain way, to deaden them. And the U.S., by contrast, has a very vital set of religious traditions. And so that's a long-standing fact. So the general so-called theory of secularization that says there's been a decline that just accompanies modernity. Modernity means less religion, is a story about Europe. It's not a story about the U.S. More recently, since the 60s and 70s, there's been a new and different kind of engagement in the public sphere. So in earlier periods, there were things like this. People tend to forget, so nobody remembers the social gospel, which was a more left-of-center effort to make Christianity speak to social issues, to immigration, to inequality, to the kind of needs people had in their lives on earth, not just hereafter. And so people have been familiar with the rise of a new Christian right and its very strong resonance in its power, and it's really changed things. I mean, it is an important factor. There actually was a rise of in a way, a left-of-center engagement at the same time. It didn't capture the media attention. It's not as much a part of the story. Someone like Jim Wallace, who founded Sojourners, may symbolize this, but the running was made by the conservative move. It was also made by non-denominational Christianity, so a decline in the mainstream denominations. And this made it a sort of general religion in the public sphere. New alliances were forged. Prior to this period, Catholics and Protestants were at odds with each other. They became allies, interestingly, on both the left and the right. So an alliance between, say, nuns who are working on social action, health for coal miners, or poverty within the Dorothy Day tradition, with people from Christian traditions and secular people who were working on those issues. On the right, again, an alliance that included secular people, Protestants and Catholics, the anti-abortion alliance. And so this politicized religion moved forward. And that's different from the UK. Now that's come in a way now. And there are big issues that galvanize people. And they galvanize in the same way. That is, there's lots of secular opinion about the ordination of women priests. It's not just in the church. And the UK has now a very plural religious society. I mean, in a way it did with Baptists and Methodists in the 19th century, but in a different way now, there's religious pluralism. And so the UK is coming to terms with that within its own tradition. There's a less well-developed vocabulary for religion in public life. In the US, people are at ease with biblical references, including secular people who may not be able to trace them to the Bible, but it's part of the speech. So a language of redemption, right? People may think of as something that a part of everyday language they may not particularly associate with the story of Jesus. But the public culture is suffused by a lot of this. And there's language. Black culture in the US, the civil rights movement forward, is heavily influenced by this. And so a talk of the Exodus story, right, reaches out into a wider culture through the way this became a narrative that could then include the struggle for freedom for African Americans and Dr. Martin Luther King, but then a variety of people on to say Cornel West today. And that hasn't been as true in the UK. The last several decades haven't seen major struggles as centrally organized in a religious vocabulary. If you think of the nuclear disarmament movement a generation ago, there certainly was religion and a lot of religious people engaged in that, but the vocabulary was the secular vocabulary. E.P. Thompson was the great famous leader of that. There were a variety of people motivated by their faith, but that it didn't become a part of the public language of the movement in the same way.